You are listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. I'm Kyle Bryan.
And I'm Sean Baumstark. Together, we're navigating life with disability.
Sean and I were both diagnosed with a rare, debilitating, life-shortening disease that has affected our physical abilities and causes us to live with urgency. We are constantly looking for the next challenge, not only in spite of our disease, but because of it.
We are two dudes who constantly challenge our own abilities, and we invite you to do the same. Welcome back, and thank you for listening in. Today we're featuring the rest of our interview with Ron Bartek, the president and co-founder of the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance, otherwise known as FARA. In case you missed it, you can jump back to episode 9 and learn more about Ron and some of the things he's been involved in throughout the years. For now, let's jump right into our featured conversation today with Ron Bartek.
I want to talk about your bio a little more and about your military experience. And specifically, one time you told me that at West Point you learned to sleep standing up. And so, can you tell us that story?
Yeah, it was actually in Ranger School. We all learned to sleep standing up in Ranger School, and it wasn't necessarily anything we worked at. You'd be out on patrol, middle of the night, pitch black, and march, or not marching, but patrolling for hours and hours, and you hadn't eaten in 3 days, and you hadn't slept in 3 days, and so you finally begin to hallucinate. And I can remember two things. You were focused on pitch blackness. You were focused on the two luminescent stripes on the back of the ranger cap of the guy in front of you in the patrol. And you were following those two stripes. And when those two stripes moved, you moved. And so quite often in the middle of the night, you'd come up against or right behind a tree. And if you've ever been in the woods in the middle of the night, you know that the trees become luminescent. Parts of their the mold and moss that grows on trees have a luminescent quality. And there'll be times when you sort of come up against the tree thinking they're the two stripes, and you think that's your buddy in front of you. So if you establish contact with that buddy, if he moves away, you're going to wake up. So you go ahead and grab about 30 seconds of shut-eye, standing up against the tree, and then you figure out, that guy's not moving, and you realize it's a tree, and you're about 50 yards behind the patrol, and you know that because the guy behind you is saying, "What's up?" So the other thing that you began to hallucinate is because you hadn't eaten in 3 or 4 days. Is the food line. You in the Army, you're used to going into a chow line, picking up your tray, turning right, going down the buffet line, if you will, the chow line. And there were times when I or somebody else would, walking up this hill in the patrol, reach out, we'd hallucinate the chow line, reach out, grab our tray, turn right, start going down the chow line. And somebody would grab your shirt back, Ron, this is, we're over here. It's amazing what your brain does to you when you're sleep deprived and food deprived. And that was the whole deal of Ranger School, to show you that under those deprivation conditions, you could still function. It might take a good buddy from time to time to jerk you back into reality, but you could still, when you were a appointed patrol leader, immediately all that disappeared and you were functioning. So that was the lesson learned. That you could go through all that and still function effectively.
I love that. So let's hold on to this thought for a little while. We want to get into rare disease, but I also want to ask you a little bit later. After we get a good base for rare disease, what kind of stuff in your training and in your experiences helps you be a good leader in rare disease and in society in general. So, but I want you to tell us a little more about Keith, Ron. And I want you to share a little bit about the shared experience of being diagnosed with a rare disease, because I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to. And so what was it like when Keith was first diagnosed?
Okay. Excellent question. And, I know all three of us have had this experience. So, and a lot of your listeners will have had the same experience. So I'll try to be brief. It's hard to be brief because these things are so important to all of us. But, so Keith was 9 years old when we first started seeing things that we thought had to go beyond just growing pains. And, we had seen some stumbling, we'd seen some awkwardness before that. We'd seen some lack of coordination, but I can remember like working with him to play wiffle ball and stuff and thinking, well, he's shooting up, he's growing, and so his musculature is not catching up, or his neurology is not catching up with his musculature. So he's gonna work through this. He'll get better coordinated, and then he's gonna be, he's gonna hit that wiffle ball out of the park, sort of thing. And I took him fishing a couple of times, and he really liked that, and I could tell he had great instincts for it, but he was having trouble with the cast, and and then he had trouble with handwriting in school, and his grades started to suffer a little bit, and so we started going to counseling sessions and with counselors and teachers, and we all knew that he was a great kid, great attitude, worked hard, but he wasn't really functioning very at peak, and then he started stumbling more, and it started getting worse rather than better with handwriting and stuff, and I'd work with that. Make a long story a little bit longer, we finally went to a counseling session that included the principal, most of his teachers, and a counselor, and we were all just really puzzled because we knew he was trying, we knew he was a great kid, but we knew he wasn't thriving. And so we were leaving that conference, and the counselor stepped up to us and said, "You know what? You might go take Keith to a neurologist and see if there's anything going on neurologically." And so that sounded like a great idea. Raychel took him into a neurologist, and it took us a couple of months to get an appointment. There was no, sense of great urgency. I really thought that, okay, the neurologist is going to identify something wrong in his elbow, and give him a couple of pills, and he's going to be fine. And Raychel called me. I didn't even go to the appointment. We really weren't, deeply concerned because we didn't think it was that bad. But Raychel called from the neurologist's office. Keith was still in with the neurologist. And she took a break, called me, and said, she was in tears. And she said, the neurologist isn't certain, but the clinical examination revealed some things that leads her to believe that what Keith has is something called Friedreich's ataxia. And of course, we'd never heard of it, didn't even know how to spell it. And what the clinician recommended was that we go ahead and take a blood sample and send it in to a lab and have it analyzed. And she said that she was about 85% certain it was FA. And Rachel said to me, so I asked her, so what can we do about it? And she said, unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about it. And so we got home and started going on to our old computer, our old gateway computer, and before Google, and started web searching, Friedreich's ataxia, and we saw some very troubling things. We knew had been plenty of bad news. We knew Keith would, if he were diagnosed with it, would get very sick very fast. We knew he would lose strength and coordination in all four limbs. We knew he'd have a much increased risk of diabetes. We knew he'd most likely have severe scoliosis requiring implantation of metal rods. We knew he'd have, he'd lose some vision, hearing, and speech. We saw that he would most likely have a very serious heart condition, the cardiomyopathy. And the only good news we saw was that the gene had been identified almost a year to the day earlier. So this was in March of '97 that we got his informal clinical diagnosis. It was March of '96, as you know, where the team had identified the gene. So we looked at that. It took us a few months to get there. We got the diagnosis like 2 weeks later. Immediately had his two brothers, Byron and Stuart, sampled. We took their blood samples, sent it off to the same lab at Athena, and found out that yes, Keith had FA. Byron was clear; he got neither mutation, and Stuart got one mutation and one healthy gene, so he was a carrier like his bio parents. So we put 3 and 1 together and came up with something pretty close to 4, we think, in that we thought that one piece of good news compared to the 3 pieces of bad news would get us there. If the other 2 pieces of bad news, of course, were that there was very little research going on, and there was no organization devoted entirely to Friedreich's ataxia research. We found out that the MDA, the Muscular Dystrophy Association, had like 42 different diseases in their portfolio. FA was one of them. The National Ataxia Foundation had about 30 ataxias. FA was one of them. But in neither case were there enough resources to devote to a lot of research in FA. We found the 3 scientists in the world that had worked pretty intently on it, and spoke with them at about the same time. We thought that if we were able to establish a foundation and raise enough in the way of resources, create enough energy, that with the gene having been identified, we could make some progress fairly quickly. And so we assembled, I think it was 7 other parents like ourselves, and only 5 other parents like ourselves, and 1 adult patient, and formed and added the 3 scientists that were leading in the research, and that became FARA's board of directors. We submitted our paperwork to the District of Columbia to incorporate the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance. Got the results in September of '98. A little over a year after the diagnosis, and so we had a board of directors. We had a FARA established. The very next day, we took the inch-thick application, paper application, to the NIH, handed it across the Dutch window to the little old lady in tennis shoes at the NIH, and to apply for the world's first scientific conference or workshop at the NIH on FA. And it was an application that we'd worked with the 3 scientists on. We'd identified 65 other scientists around the world. And we were ready to invite them to a conference at the NIH that would be joined by the 15 people at the NIH that knew something about Friedreich's ataxia and could spell it. And 4 months later, we got the approval of the grant that we were asking for. It was about $41,000 from the NIH to fund the world's first scientific conference on FA. And we invited all those scientists. We invited some drug companies, and we invited some other patient advocacy organizations. To fast forward, 6 months after the application, we held that conference at the NIH, 2.5 days. We had 80 scientists from around the world, including the 15 at the NIH. No drug companies were there. They all said, "You're too rare, you're on your own." One other advocacy organization, NAF, National Ataxia Foundation, sent its 2 leaders. So we held that conference for 2.5 days. And most of the things that we've been able to accomplish and now we're in our 18th year, stemmed from that very first conference. We knew how important it was to get all these people together. We knew how important it was to add to that collection drug companies and other advocacy organizations. And fast forward to the 5th International Scientific Conference in Windsor, England, outside London, a year and a half ago. There were 350 scientists, a dozen drug companies in attendance, 20 more back home working hard on FA. There were 10 other advocacy organizations helping us fund along with the drug companies. So, and whereas in that first conference, there was no clinical trial. There was one little open label trial that Pierre Roustan in Paris had conducted with like 5 FA patients with idebenone. And, fast forward to the one in 2015, and there were 9 clinical trials going on at that time and many more to come. So we've come a long way. We still are looking for that first treatment. But whereas when we started, everybody was isolated and on their own and didn't know each other, didn't know any other patients and that sort of thing. And they were, had no real reason for hope in those early days. Now we've changed isolation and hopelessness to, a family affair that's global, and everybody's in this together. And we're now not just hopeful, but confident that we're going to get the treatments. And we're going to be able, now you can see that there's so much confidence, not just in our patient community and families, but among these scientists. They want to be part of the cure. They want to be part of the solution. That's why they're working so hard. They could be doing something else and making $1 million a year, but they're all in for all of us because they want to be part of the cure of this rare disease. So it's
amazing.
Magic.
So Ron, we had a bunch of questions for you, but you just answered all of them. So
see you later.
Bye now.
No, really appreciate that. So, Farah is making amazing progress, and I think one of the things that's really important is for all of us to manage our expectations, right? So when you say we're gonna get the cure, I truly believe that too. But I also know that there's so much going on between now and when that cure comes. And I think it's important for all of us to recognize every little milestone that we reach that truly is going to get us there. And I think that keeps us engaged, and I think that keeps us really informed in understanding what's really going on. Because I think all of us, and it's easy to see why, we have a tendency to judge the process by, do we have a cure or not? Like, and that's not fair. And that does not get us there. And I think it's important for us to really understand the science as much as we can anyway. And recognize when there are things that happen that aren't a cure, but it's truly one step closer to getting there one day.
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant and very important point, Kyle. And I'd say that what that brings up in my heart is, if we had to sit idly by and wait for the cure, that would be horrific, wouldn't it? I mean, it's like, okay, got no control over this. I have no contribution to make. It's just these brilliant scientists that have to come up with it, and these drug companies that have to drive it home. But that's absolutely not the case. And, there is so much we can all do, and so much that so many of you and your listeners are doing right now that's helping move the ball further down the field and faster. And the list goes on and on. I mean, it starts with, as you're saying, learn as much as you can about your condition and about the science that will help treat it. Secondly, it's a matter of look at all the relationships that have been powerfully important to this whole project, and beginning with the scientists. And so many of our patients have now met our basic scientists, and those basic scientists have said to many of us, meeting you and having you meet the people in my lab, has changed my life and changed the lives of my lab mates, and any number of times. And that's so important, because these people then know two things. They know why they're doing what they're doing and for whom, and your sense of urgency gets transmitted to them, and they genuinely care about you. And so that becomes very important. The second thing they learn is about your condition from you. They're going to know a lot about the biomolecular basis of your disease, but they won't know nearly as much as you know about your symptoms and what causes you the most grief during your everyday. What would you like to be able to do better? And because they do know the biomolecular basis of your disease, they're trying to figure out what part of that molecular reality is causing that symptom that is causing you most distress. And so they are actually beginning to formulate their basic research plan around, that's the symptom that causes the most grief. What part of the mitochondrial energy production, or what part of the of the problem with cardiac or diabetes or whatever it is leading to that? So now I know what endpoint I'm after. What can I develop in my basic research? And then when you're doing that with a clinical researcher, like the ones that you've all been to, they're really hands-on. And I'll add at this point that every time you see one of these clinicians, we've got 8 centers around the U.S. now, and one in Toronto and one in Melbourne, Australia. We're beginning to develop one near Sao Paulo, Brazil, and we work very closely with all those sites in Europe. Every time one of our patients sees one of those clinicians and does the FARS exam and does these things that you've done a good number of times, we learn that much more. And the natural history of our disease is being well established. We now have about 900 patients that have been through those exams at least once. Some of them have been through a dozen times, over 12 years. And so now the FDA finds it so compelling that we know the natural history of our disease. So equally importantly, all these drug companies. Why do you think there are now 35 drug companies working with us? Because they look and they see these patients have worked so hard to get all these things together that we need to be successful. We've got the world's largest patient registry. Every time we get a new registrant on that registry, it lights up the board, and we'll be that much better equipped to recruit the next clinical trial. So we've got the world's largest patient registry. We've got by far the largest natural history database. So these companies can come to us, as they almost always do now, and spend a full day with Farrell leadership, our best clinicians, our best basic scientists, and through those scientists mine our natural history to say, okay, this is the natural course of the disease. These are the symptoms, and these are when those symptoms occur. And so let's design our clinical trial around trying to slow, stop, and reverse those symptoms. And by the way, they know what you can tolerate. How many exams you can do during one day before you get so fatigued that the other exams are nonsense.
One. We can do one.
Exactly right. So we're learning so much because, and it all goes back to the patient, doesn't it? I mean, it's every time the patient signs up for the patient registry or gives the refresher to your data, so we know how to contact you and where. Every time you go to a clinician and get examined with the FARS exam and so forth, we learn that much more. And all that, and every time you talk with a basic scientist or a clinical scientist, they get that much more fired up. So this is all going into the fact that now, through the hard efforts of our patients, we've gathered these 35 or so drug companies. They all say the same thing. You guys have it nailed. You have everything we need to succeed. And they know that we know how to use it. They know that we recruit our clinical trials in a matter of hours, not years, which is the norm. And they know that our clinical trials proceed smoothly. They're not, we do it without dropouts. We do it without amendments. They know we have the highest likelihood of getting it right from the beginning, so they don't have to change, in midstream. Right. We still have work to do, so it's still important to keep going. And
I also think that the drug companies that we work with, that we're fortunate to work with, they realize that when we all work together to identify something that we don't currently have, we're gonna go after it, and we're gonna make sure that it's there when we need it.
It's certainly a very motivated, driven, accomplishment-oriented community of people that that are a part of the process here and a part of the family that you mentioned. For sure.
I don't think there's another community like it.
You talked about so much in there, and there are a couple things that come to mind for me. I believe what you and Raychel and Keith and the rest of the people in your world have done is, when you saw it out and said, okay, there's nothing going on, we got to do something. I believe that alone started to bring a bit of humanity to what's going on, because now we can all identify, we can all see what's going on, what we're up against. Whereas before, like you said, people were isolated. We were hopeless. We thought we were alone. We had no idea what to do. So, to go from one patient maybe-ish to 900, that's incredible. And it's so telling of the passion, enthusiasm, and the drive behind you and the rest of the community. I also, when you talk about meeting people in clinical trials and inspiring lab mates to increase their sense of urgency and to really be a bit inspired and rejuvenated, because like you said, it could take years. It could take a lot of money. It's a lot of speed bumps, and it's easy to get a little leery or weary or whatever the word is, and to kind of lose focus. And personal experience, I did a clinical trial about a year ago, at a brand new site, had never dealt with FARA before, and had such an incredible experience there. The neurologist that oversaw my part of the trial has since, a year later, has gone to see the ataxia, which kind of captures a lot of what's going on in the world of FA. And after meeting so many of us West Coast, FA patients, he said just like 2 months ago, I am forever committed to helping. I'm going to work in this space for FA as long as I can. And you're talking about a guy who has probably been a doctor for 50 years and is well into his career, and now all of a sudden his eyes are opened, and he's moved to be a part of that legacy, to be a part of the process. Whether that cure comes in 5 years or 5 decades, he's committed to be a part of the process. And I believe you would agree that is what it's all about.
Absolutely right. He's become, like all of us, all in for all of us, and
Sure.
and he's all in for all of us because you touched his heart. The other is a recent experience we had at the FDA. It was our first meeting with the Center for Biologic Evaluation and Research, CBER. It was the first time we met with them because we've always been meeting with the other side of the FDA house, the CDER, this Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, because all of our compounds in clinical trials have been in their bailiwick, been small molecules or different ways to approach mitochondrial energy and so forth. Now with gene therapy on our doorstep, we're going to be in front of the reviewers in the biologics part of the FDA. So we sent them a letter and asked for a meeting. We got a 1-hour meeting on the 23rd of January. The office director of that office that will be reviewing our gene therapy programs stood up at the end and thanked us for being with them, congratulated FARA for doing all the things that we've been able to do, and congratulating us, for example, for the patient registry, for the natural history database, he said, and also for the fact that we had, in this first meeting, we didn't come alone. We didn't come with one drug company. We came with 4 drug companies and 2 universities that were all committed to doing gene therapy in FA. And he said, we don't see that. You guys are so wonderfully collaborative. We usually see one company at a time and they're competing. You've brought all 4 companies and 2 universities into this pre-competitive space because they realize, as they should, they're all going to need the same things. And you guys have done a wonderful job, he said, of getting all this together. I'll tell a quick sideline story that really replicates yours, Sean. That is, I had met this office director before, had a brief conversation with him. I found out in this brief conversation a couple of years ago that he was a neurologist, that he had seen a good number of FA patients when he was doing clinical neurology, and that he thought the world of these FA patients. He was thrilled to see us come in, and the last thing he said to me was, now that you've done such a good job of assembling all these companies and the universities, when we'll look forward to their coming in with their proposals for clinical trials, we hope they bring FARA along. And I assured him they would, because that's how we roll, right?
Right.
We're all in this together. So just a long illustration of the wonderful point made.
You used one keywords very specifically in there. Besides, right there at the end, you said, we're all in this together. But you also mentioned the word collaborative. Mm-hmm. And anybody that knows you, knows FARA, they probably use that word to describe you and your efforts and the force behind what you do. What does that word mean to you?
You're going to get me crying again, aren't you? Well, it really goes back to, and Kyle mentioned early on that, what was it about my background at West Point or Ranger School or the Army that sort of got me into this mold. And I always say that I think that mold begins at home. It begins with a family and begins with relationships you build in your own family. And so I took those wonderful relationships to West Point, and West Point sort of helped groom and refine those sort of tendencies towards consensus building and relationships and leadership accordingly. And then so I had like 5 different lives. You can tell from the bio that Kyle so breathlessly read. And I look at those 5 lives and say they've all helped shape me and my commitment, and also helped shape mission orientation. If there was anything that came out of my West Point and Army training, it was mission first, and that's what we've built in this collaborative spirit around FARA, is focus on the mission. And I'd also say that when Raychel and I first assembled these 8 lay people and 3 scientists to form FARA, you can look at our very first brochures, our very first web postings, and see we absolutely knew we couldn't do it alone. We were going to be too small, too rare. We needed to be all in all together. And we started saying that, alone there's very little we can accomplish. Together there's very little we will not accomplish. And the other thing is we started saying that, this could be the small engine that could. And so to be the small engine that could, we need to collaborate with anybody and everybody that has any interest or commitment to FA. And it started with our patients. We knew we had to establish trust with our patient and patient family community, and it went to our academic scientists, then to our government partners, the NIH primarily. We knew we were too early on to work with the FDA, but we would need to. And finally, our industry partners that we didn't have yet. So we knew it had to be. That's when we started saying in our first brochure, I think, it was like, in real estate, it's location, location, location. In medical research, it's collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. And so what it means to me is everybody has to put their shoulder to the wheel. Otherwise, we won't get it done. Another answer to your question, Kyle, was we started first collaborating with the other organizations that had FA in their portfolio. But then we realized that there are umbrella organizations out there that were for all rare diseases, like the National Organization for Rare Disorders. And they had invited me to become part of a working group on their board, and I got to see them up close and personally, and really was struck with the fact that their slogan is always, alone we are rare, together we are strong. And I like to say that a little bit differently. Alone we are rare, together we are uncommonly strong. And so they're representing 30 million American rare disease patients. We're representing maybe 5,000 or 6,000 American rare disease patients, and maybe 15,000 worldwide. So you can imagine how much stronger our corporate voice is, our collective voice is, when we go to Capitol Hill, when we go to the NIH, when we go to the FDA, with NORD. We're speaking for 30 million Americans, and that's really far more impressive for members of Congress than if I were to go in there by myself. So anyway, so And that kind of collaboration is true at the NIH and the FDA. But those are the, and then there are other organizations like the Alliance for a Stronger FDA, on which I serve on their board, and they're not just rare disease but common diseases too. And we work closely with Global Genes and with the Every Life Foundation and Genetic Alliance. So these are all people I know that you two disablingly awesome dudes have spoken with before, and we all see it the same way. We're all in this together, and we all have our own capabilities, and we're much stronger together. So.
Well, we couldn't find a better sentence to end on. We're all in this together is a theme reflective of the entire rare disease community. Thank you again for tuning in to episode 12. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you'll join us again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. To find this episode and links to some of the stuff we talked about today, find us online at twodisableddudes.com or subscribe on iTunes.
We'd like to hear from you and feature your feedback and questions on future podcasts. Be sure to visit us at twodisableddudes.com to find our contact info and connect on social media.
Special thanks to our audio producer, Jake Tompkins, who also composed the music.
We'll share a new podcast every other week. We hope you'll listen and share it with a friend. Until next time, keep living with urgency.